This is the play. We watch the scenes we live unfold.
Okay, thanks. Okay, welcome everyone to this part one governing body meeting of the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin CCG. So this is a meeting that is conducted in public. So welcome to those members of the public that are following us on the live streaming. The meeting is also being recorded, and particularly like to welcome two guests to the meeting. Firstly, Simon Whitehouse, who's the interim ICS CEO for Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And also, I believe we have Dr. David Sunday, who's a GP trainee, shadowing Rachel Robinson, Director of Public Health. So that's grand. And apologies, I've had apologies from just simply Dr. Martin Allen will almost certainly have to leave at 2 p.m. Will be in the first part of the meeting, but is having to chair another meeting from 2 o'clock. If I could just lay down a few ground rules, if we could avoid using the chat function for comments or conversation, apart from any sort of functional items and recording issues or what have you, but not in terms of the discussion, because the members of the public can't see the items in the chat. So if we can avoid the chat, that would be good. Thank you. We do have a tight timetable today, and just to lay the background to that, we are currently having to balance the needs of playing our full part in supporting the system, which obviously is under considerable pressures within the healthcare system at the moment. So we're balancing that with maintaining the need for rigour in our governance and assurance processes that we hold. And this is further referenced in the letter of the 24th of December from NHS E&I, which is actually included in the pack today. It's included under the agenda item from Alison Smith regarding the Constitution and Governance Handbook, and it's appended within that item. So it was really just to explain that explains why the timescales are shortened, but we do still want this to be, a rigorous board meeting, and but with that understanding that obviously there are clear system pressures, and understand that Sam Tilley might at some point have to nip in and out of this meeting. Okay, so moving on then to declarations of interest. If anyone has any declarations of interest above and beyond those within our register of declarations of interest pertaining to items on the agenda today, please raise your hand now. Okay. So if we can then move on to the minutes from previous meetings. So firstly, minutes of the governing body meeting of the 10th of November 21. Any comments or points arising from that? Okay. Deborah.
Yeah, just to point out, I'm now the medical director. I'm no longer interim. I think it's in the list of attendees, and I think it's the same a bit further down as well.
Yeah, we can have that amended. Thank you, Deborah. Anyone else? No, great. It's good to see lots of cameras on, I must say. Thank you. Okay, on to the minutes then of the extraordinary governing body meeting of the 8th of December 21. It looks as though we're good for that. Excellent, thank you. Super. So if we can move on into the action tracker now from previous governing body meetings. If I can just, so for the purposes of time, just go through that we've had specific recommendations to close items 1, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 and 11. So unless there are other specific comments around those items, then I would suggest we look at item 2, which I'd also recommend we consider as closing. Item 2 was the work done on the prevention of falls. I see that that there's favourable benchmarking data against that of other trusts, and SAP has an internal target. And I propose that, unless there are any other comments to the contrary, that we close this, as the data shall still continue to be reported. But any other comments welcome on item 2?
Just on that, John, I think the action is to receive the detail to QPC, and we'll agenda that accordingly. And as you quite rightly say, there's some information there just to allow members and the line of sight really on the progress that is being made. Lovely, thanks, Zena. That's excellent. Then item 3. Now, Zena, again, this comes under your remit. I noticed that we've got an update that should be included in the papers for the March governing body meeting. So my recommendation, again, with comments welcome, would that we keep that open, as it should come to us in March. Okay, good. And then item 7 on the tracker. It was really, there wasn't a recommendation here specifically. Donna, just interested, I think there's a little typo at the end. The last 2 words in the comment section probably just need deleting. I don't think "and through" is required. But it was, Donna, just whether the actions answer the questions that you raised regarding assurance statements in the quality and performance exception reports.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We always receive a very detailed report, which very helpful for us as governing body members. I think there was perhaps just, and I see the response that says that the areas that are of concern are highlighted in that. I suppose just as a non-clinician, it was just trying to dig a little deeper into if there are those where the experts are still have some degree of concern, more than others. So it was just it was a increasing the definition of the information we get around assurance. But I think that's probably something I could speak to Zena outside of the meeting.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So if it's all right with members, I'd suggest we close that. And Donna, you and Zena will liaise further on that point. Okay. Good. I did see another hand up. It's since gone down. Mike, are you happy?
So apologise. It was actually about item 5. But if you go through, I'll come back in when you've come to the end of the points.
We have.
Well, then can I ask that I don't understand that it says about ambulance services and the delays, which is still ongoing, and it says a regional review has taken place. The results are being considered locally. So if they're being considered locally, how can we recommend if we haven't seen the results of the study?
Yeah, I think the action relates to actually including that information in further reports, Mike, rather than speaking to the actual content of the findings of any one particular report as part of this action log.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, but it just the question is, if the results being considered, when are we going to be seeing those, or what is going to happen to those, because there are still ongoing issues.
Yeah, so we'll receive that information to the CCG's subcommittee of this board, which we've recently agreed will be a committee in common with the ICB Quality Committee in February. So it'll be scheduled at some point on the agenda after the February meeting, I would expect, Mike. So it will be received to a subcommittee, a quality committee of both the CCG and ICS, ICB.
So will that feed back to us then?
Well, it'll feed through in the usual way on the exception report, and I'll make a note for a particular mention of that for this meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thanks, Zena. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is questions from members of the public. We have received submitted questions from the members of the public this month, and answers shall be published on the website within the usual 3-week timescale. Okay, thank you. Mark, if I can hand over to you now for the Accountable Officers report.
Thanks, John, and afternoon all. So I've really got kind of 2 things to mention. The first is quite brief. The second is me giving you a bit of a flavour of what's going on across the health system at the moment. So I'll just deal with the first issue, which really is about, just to clarify for anybody that's not picked it up, I think everybody has now, that the CCGs, all CCGs have been extended until the end of June. So dissolution at the end of June rather than the end of March. We've been working through, sorry, it's just a bit of background noise if people wouldn't mind just popping on mute. We've been working through the consequences of that. Claire's team have been working through what, in effect, 2 year ends means. So I know they'll be well on top of that in terms of the accounts, but just to call out, there is quite a lot of work with that. Alison's work continues, of course, in terms of the handover, John, to the ICB, and making sure that we kind of dissolve properly and well. I'll let Simon comment later on in the agenda. Simon's joined us today. It's great to see him. And I'm going to leave the integrated care board or the system update to him, and he may want to comment on this. But him and I have both talked about the fact that to some extent it's not an unhelpful delay, in that it gives more time, in a sense, to hand over in an even better way than we were hoping to hand over before. And of course, the ICB is moving to a place now where I believe in a week or so's time, maybe a week and a half, the 5 senior jobs should be out to advert. And of course, colleagues will know that the non-executive roles have fundamentally already been advertised. So it will give the ICB a chance to gather its people and begin to form itself, which again will make it easier for us to hand over to. So just to call that out. John, my only other item today really is just to walk people through kind of what the CCG is at the moment and what it isn't, in a sense, and what we're doing. So a colleague commented this morning, a senior colleague, that this is probably, as far as we're concerned, as a team of chief executives, the most difficult time of the pandemic. And I actually think that's probably true. It's a very, very difficult time for the whole health and care system. And I really do mean and care system. We are spending, those of us at senior and more junior levels, much of our time with local authority colleagues, which is always a pleasure, but it gives you a sense of the focus at the moment in terms of trying to keep our patients safe, look after our staff, manage COVID, and keep the system flowing. And it is very, very difficult. The CCG, as John mentioned, on Christmas Eve was clearly directed to basically seek to minimise itself and to do what it could to redeploy staff to support, before Christmas, in a sense, the vaccination programme, and a word on that in a moment. And then after Christmas, really, just to give a kind of a definition of the two phases, after Christmas, excuse me, the urgent and emergency care system. And I'd like to thank director colleagues on the call, but I'd like to thank all of the staff, actually, including clinical colleagues working in the CCG, but not only them, all of our staff, in terms of the way people have taken that on. And many of them stopped what they were doing before and been redeployed into different roles. And also for the ones left behind, if you like, who've then quite often had to pick up other people's work or other areas of work. And I commend the work of both of those group to the board. But it's really important that I'm really clear with you that we are not in any way in a normal period of operating. So, John, I'm very grateful to you and the board today for consideration of what is a short but will be well orchestrated meeting, so I won't go on too long, you'll be pleased to know, given the pressures that we're all experiencing at the moment. So let me give you some optimism first. In terms of the vaccination programme, I am delighted to say that the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin vaccination programme is amongst the most successful programmes in the country. The HSJ has produced a league table like it likes to do, and basically overall we're second behind Gloucester, which is pretty good place to be, first in the region in terms of vaccines overall, but actually we're top in the country, it would appear, for boosters and also particularly for immunosuppressed. And I think in our little system, we should be really, really pleased about that. I'm not going to call out everybody involved because I would be bound to leave somebody out, but the vaccination programme has been a huge effort from all parties. I am just going to call out two areas that don't get enough mention, but we are very, very reliant on. The first is primary care, and to thank colleagues for their flexibility and real hard work, the whole of the primary healthcare team, in terms of supporting a huge vaccination effort before Christmas, and also our colleagues in community pharmacy who have very much done the same. So along with colleagues right across the system, some really good stuff. John, just on that, we basically have completed the mass vaccination effort. There are still people to vaccinate. We're at around kind of 85%, which is basically the point at which you run out of the big numbers of people. But what we are now doing, and primary care is doing this, and particularly we've been doing some really good work with the two local authorities. So real focus on health inequalities and really targeting, very, very targeted intervention, text messaging, door knocking in some instances, and certainly calling, and both local authorities have put significant numbers of staff on calling residents to encourage them. We've of course got Bob and Betty, our two mobile vaccination units, but also mobile teams, GPs, primary care professionals and others taking advantage of vaccinating people where we can. I am most pleased in our work around health inequalities, and more about that at the ICB board next week, when colleagues from local government are just going to share with us some of the stuff we've been doing. And actually, as we said a few weeks ago, if we could take the focused work we've been able to do on vaccination in terms of health equalities and apply it to, say, diabetes or cardiovascular disease, what an amazing thing that would be. So I think there's some real lessons for us in there. So again, thank you to everybody that's been working really, really hard on that. Very, very much appreciated. Not quite as good news is the urgent care pressures that the whole of the NHS is feeling, and we aren't excluded from that. So I make the point, this isn't a Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin issue. It's not a regional issue. It's a national issue. To be clear, a lot of the national press is very much focused on London and potentially London being past the peak. We aren't London. Our demography is very different from London. The prevalence and the way the disease has been moving is very different from London. We don't believe we're yet at the peak. We think we're probably 2 weeks, perhaps 10 days, 2 weeks away from the peak locally, which is proving very difficult to manage. The system is in what's called level 4 escalation. That's the highest level of escalation. And today, our 2 hospitals are at level 3, Shrewsbury and Telford, and they're oscillating between level 3 and level 4. Again, the highest level of escalation. We are working through a command structure. I chair a daily gold call at least once, often twice a day, including weekends. Sam Tilley, who's our incident director, chairs a silver call every single day. And then there are numerous kind of what I call bronze meetings and operational meetings, often 9, 12, 3, 6 and 9 in the evening. So I just call that out because if that's not your usual world, then you may not be aware of kind of what's going on behind the scenes really, but lots going on around that. There are 3 things that are causing us the issue really. The first is the usual winter pressures, and many of you will know what that feels like. We're feeling that right across the system. Primary care is incredibly busy, working incredibly hard. We're seeing it right across, the system from primary care, mental health services, indeed, right through to secondary care, as you would expect. So 1, usual winter pressures. 2 is managing COVID. Thankfully, we aren't seeing high numbers. In fact, we're seeing very small numbers of cases admitted to intensive care, which is really good news. I think a mixture of things. I think this variant is different. I think the drug regime is different. I think our level of vaccination helps us here too. So that is really good news. But if I tell you today that Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals has 3 wards of patients very poorly with COVID, 3 wards, we don't have 3 spare wards. We don't have 3 spare wards of staff in effect. So the position is very difficult to manage. So that's issue 2. And then issue 3, which really is the kind of almost a deal breaker in many ways, making it even more difficult, of course, is staff absence. And because of the way the variant is moving, because of infection, very, very, in fact, eye-wateringly high levels of prevalence and infection across our system, we've seen staff absence around 10, 11%, today around 8%, but that's really very, very high. And of course, differential. So in 1 or 2 professional groups, we've seen over half the staff off with COVID, which again, right across the pathway. That example was in community services, very, very difficult to manage. So they're the 3 things that are impacting on us. A couple more bits to finish with, just to give you a further flavour. Big focus on ambulance turnaround times. We've done a lot of work at the front door of A&E. Again, the whole system supporting here, again, including primary care, to try and turn our ambulances around and keep them on the road. Lots of work with the Ambulance Trust and the opening of what's called the SPA, new single point of access, which is very definitely helping us in terms of what we would call deflection. So patients that don't need to go in an ambulance to A&E, not needing to go in an ambulance. But please don't misunderstand me. The ambulance turnaround times are still not acceptable and still not good. So lots going on around that and around the front door. Second thing I wanted to mention is, of course, to apologise for patients waiting for operations, for elective care. We've tried desperately to protect cancer operations as much as we possibly can. That's difficult, but we're doing all we can. I'm very grateful to Julie as well, who's leading conversations with the local Nuffield hospital based on which is a private hospital based on some guidance from NHS England this week, where we're trying to see what we can do with the Nuffield, who are trying to support us to try and make sure that we've got as much elective capacity as we possibly can. And then also to call out my old trust, Robert Jones, which also has been, one, trying to keep some sense of orthopaedic operating going, but secondly, actually has been filling lots of gaps across the system in terms of supporting and redeploying staff. So again, that sense of a whole system effort. Finally, just to finish, John, if I may, because I do think it's my privilege to be able to do this, to call out and particularly thank colleagues in primary care. The level of flexibility, the level of commitment and hard work, not only to the vaccine programme, but actually to supporting the whole system at this very difficult time, is really well appreciated and well understood. So please if we thank everybody for their really hard work. I'm afraid this is going to go on, we think, for a few weeks yet. So one of the things we're trying to make sure is that we look after each other. One of the things this week on the staff huddle was to try and make sure we're looking after our people. People are, our staff are struggling with this, high levels of sickness, high levels of COVID and different working arrangements, and it's really not easy. So, John, hopefully that was helpful in terms of giving a flavour of the position at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thanks for that very honest appraisal of where we are. So, okay, if we could now move on to the quality and performance report. So, as in previous governing body meetings, I'd like to start by opening to discussion and questions. Julie, Zena, thank you for preparing this. If at the end of the discussion and questions there are salient points that you think we haven't teased out or that you'd particularly like to highlight, then do so. But if I could start by opening it up to comments and questions from the members, please. While they're considering their questions, then I'll take the chair's prerogative and just I had one question around section 1.4 on the mental health and learning disability part. I noticed that it's mentioned in the key risks there that that the recovery rates for IAPT have deteriorated, particularly notably for the BAME service users in September. I was just wondering whether there was a reason why that group in particular, that the recovery rate had deteriorated. It's in 1.4.
John, I'll take that question. At the moment, we don't know. I think is the honest answer. We've kind of measured it, and we're not quite sure why. And that's one of the things that we're working on in the background to try and get an understanding of why. And then when we do know that, we'll obviously bring that back, incorporate that into a future paper and what we're doing about it. But at the moment, it's just something that's become apparent, and we're doing the work with MPFT to understand why.
Okay, thanks, Julie. That's great. If I can bring in Adam.
Yeah, I've got a little collection of comments, which I hope you'll bear with. They don't necessarily need answers today, unless anybody else wants to expand on them. So just my thoughts on the quality report. Primary care, in the primary care committee, there has been public concern about access and different levels of telephone access and patient satisfaction in patient surveys. An equity of access for our population requires equity of performance. I know it's something that the CCG is working on, and I know the reports come to the PCC, but perhaps some flavour of that should come through in the board paper and whether we're making progress. Just a thought. Second bit, Shropcom, I just thought we should comment on the improvements in urgent community-based care and end-of-life planning are welcome. And I think they take the better parts of the pre-existing systems that were in Telford and Wrekin and Shropshire separately, and have taken the better parts from both sides of the map, put them together and built on them. So perhaps that's a bit of a benefit of having an integrated county-wide system. Maternity, I'm delighted the improved data with Batchanet should finally give us some better assurance in future, and the absence of serious incidents in November is welcome. And then the suboptimal infection control planned inspections in Ludlow and South. That's quite concerning to me. Standards at planned anticipated inspections are usually better than the background level of performance and unlikely to be worse than the background level of performance. And I just wondered if we could have more detail on that, either now or next time round. Those are my thoughts on quality. Apologies, I know we're short of time.
No, thank you, Adam. No, I don't wish to rush this section at all. Zena and Julie, if you'd like to come back with any comments, responses to Adam, and then after that I'll bring Audrey in.
That's Zena first, if that's okay.
Yeah, Zena.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just pick up on a couple of those points, Adam. So we'll certainly look at the primary care paper and the information that comes through and make sure relevant points are captured for governing body moving forward. I just wanted to come back on the IPC bit, really, and this was a matter of discussion at the Quality and Performance Committee that we held a little bit later than expected, for the reasons that Mark's outlined around our emergency response and activities. We stood down the December meeting, but had to squeeze in a short assurance meeting for quality and performance, which we held just last week. So this paper was written in advance of that scrutiny and discussion and debate. So I just kind of, set the scene on that one, really. This discussion that we held at the Quality and Performance Committee revolved around infection control and standards slipping, etc. And the detail was discussed there. It was disappointing for the Community Trust that these were repeat issues at Ludlow, and we have gained assurance that those matters have now been put right. I think it was at a point in time where the leadership for infection prevention and control at the Community Trust, there was certainly a gap in it with the transition arrangements or the change in leadership at senior nurse level in the Community Trust, and that's been recognised and additional resources being put to the IPC team there, and we're really pleased to see that. On a broader sense, for infection prevention and control, we've put additional senior support in from the CCG to support both Shropshire Community Trust and Robert Jones, and indeed the care home sector, to shore up our interventions, oversight, and our assurance that infection prevention and control measures are being taken, and that we're maximising patient flow, which is obviously really important at the moment. I think just coming back to SAF's Infection Prevention and Control Challenge, we know it's Ward 25. That has been a matter of concern for some time. There is additional leadership oversight and support for that ward, but it does still remain a ward of concern, I would say.
Thank you, Zena. Thank you. Adam, does that cover your points?
It's just nice to know what's happening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Zena. Audrey.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this detailed report. The bit I want to pick up on is safeguarding in children, please. I can't give you the page number, but that's the heading. And there's an escalation has occurred to the CCG concerning health contribution to the single point of access multi-agency safeguarding hub, MASH. And I just want the assurance really that we have sorted the short-term problem out as much as we can, because obviously later down in the report then we've got the easing of COVID-19, lockdown nationally and regionally and locally have showed increasing child abuse concerns. So just want to make sure the MASH is working, we fix the health concerns, and then we can deal with the outpouring from COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. So Compass is the name of the MASH service for Shropshire. We've got Family Connect, which is the Telford and Wrekin equivalent. These are multi-agency safeguarding hubs. So this is the first and single point of referral for any safeguarding concerns that come into our system for the two respective local authorities. And in those forums, there's a triage process and decision to proceed to make further inquiries, etc. What we established through the raising of concerns through partners within our system is that we had a gap in our commissioning arrangements, and this is what we've inherited. So it's a historic gap in funded arrangements. We had a more fully funded arrangement in Telford and Wrekin and a less fully funded in Shropshire. and we've attended to that fairly swiftly. So one of our partners, MPFT, has put in an immediate and temporary staffing arrangement to cover the safeguarding elements. That will end at the end of March, and we were charged with putting a business case together to get funding to obviously to commission this service more substantively. I can confirm that that funding was allocated through a joint arrangement between Shropshire Local Authority, and Rachel Robinson, who's on the call today, can vouch that she's part of that arrangement, and the CCG, and that's secure. The next step for that is to recruit to the staffing plan substantively moving forward, Audrey, and that's already started. We do have some leeway to maintain our interim arrangements until we get staff through the door, because we know it takes a little bit of time to do that. But I'm confident that matter's been dealt with.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Just in reference to Mike's comment about the action tracker and the WMS ambulance delays, obviously this is now part of Zena's report, and it is, and then we get much more detailed information come to our committee, and just to assure that this is, we've now got some improved line of sight into significant events or delays, and that this is something that's going to be looked at ongoing in hopefully in the quality committees as they move forward into the ICS. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Adam, I'm presuming a historic hand there.
It is historic, and if I can get my computer to play, I'll take it away. I'm just wrestling with it.
Well, otherwise, you'll be first in for the questions on every paper, but that's all right. OK, good. Thank you very much, all. Thank you for that report and for those responses. So the governing body is asked to note the content of the report and the actions being taken to address the issues identified. Thank you. So we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the NHS Patient Safety Specialist. Again, if we can take the same format of starting with questions from members, and then if there are any additional items to highlight, then do so. Apologies, Zena and Julie, I didn't ask you at the end of the last agenda item actually whether there are any additional items, but in the absence of hands, I presume not. So yeah, the NHS Patient Safety Specialist. Any questions from the membership, please? Meredith.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, Zena, for the paper. I've just got one or 2 points of for clarification, if I may. I've just got a little list here. The page 4, well, at least it's on my page 4. Hopefully you can make sense of this. There's a bullet reading. I think it should be PSS. PPS refers to just culture, and support. I just wanted to double check what was meant by just. Presumably that's just as in the fair and right sense, is it?
It's exactly that, Meredith. It's a just culture of, making sure that people have confidence and safety to speak up and to address any safety issues.
Thank you. Then the 4th bullet, there are 3 acronyms I didn't recognise. I probably should, but I didn't. Can you, without wanting to put you on the spot, Zena, are you able to talk us through those?
So is it PSIRF, PSIRF? Is that one of them, Meredith? We'll have to work together on this.
I can help, Meredith, if you
great,
want.
thank
the 4th bullet point. So, Zena, it says support transition from NRLS
Yes, okay. So NRLS, the National Reporting and Learning System, which is the current arrangements that we have as part of the NHS Serious Incident Framework, and STICE is the strategic something or other to do with reporting incidents nationally. It's the SI reporting system. Can't for the life of me think of the abbreviation. And it may be AHSN is the other one, the Academic Health Science Network. I do apologise. We should have explained those.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Mark, for your help there. Great. Thank you, Zena. No, that's lovely. And a more substantive issue, I just wanted to know how this work around patient safety and a kind of a systematic culture shift ties in with CQC's finding that safety at South was, I know we're going to cover it later, scoring inadequate, and I would have expected this report to be kind of referring to that rather more specifically. I'd just be interested in your take on that.
I think it's a slightly different remit of this report, Meredith. This report is an update report from the initial report that was received to governing body, I think it was in 2020, requiring us to implement a patient safety specialist patient safety strategy functions. And so this is an update on the progress with the programme of work associated with some really key deliverables of the patient safety strategy, which is around the implementation of the response framework, the online training, and things like a just culture. So it's a slightly different approach, I would say, Meredith.
I understand they're coming at it from different perspectives, but do you agree, though, that it'd be important to pull the two things together?
I think what we would expect to see from the patient safety specialist in due course would be not just an update on progress with implementing the strategy, but an update on the key work programs within their strategic work. So what are the key themes that the system is working together on, and what's our level of confidence and assurance that those are progressing and improving? I would agree it's not within this report, but that information is certainly available to us within the system through other sort of arms of the quality governance. And I think with our committees in common approach, the CCG will start to see some of the work we're doing in the ICS space, and that would be one element of it.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Zena. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Yes, and thank you, Zena. I mean, I agree with Meredith's point. I mean, in the introduction, it does describe the patient safety specialist as a post within the CCG, but has a leadership role across the system. So I would agree with those comments. Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, I think you've just picked up the same point, John. It was just from my own understanding, and I recognise this is a sort of post that has a specific remit, and which is different to, there are other people looking at this, but will they be involved in taking some of the information that we've just received in the previous report around safety issues and sharing that and spreading that in a system way to improve the care and safety of services for our patients?
I mean, that's exactly it, Donna. This is about the serious incidents that are reported and any themes and trends, and extract any learning from that view of our activity and safety, and making sure that we have extracted the learning and applied that across our system, not just for any one provider. And I think in the past, and you'll see with, for example, with Never events, we very much focus on making sure we've contained the issue, learning for that individual organisation. But I think the patient safety strategy takes it further, and we have learning that can be applied between organisations. So that's one element, but also looking at the trends and themes, looking at early line of sight of anything that might be an emerging issue or a lower level of concern that actually is a matter that we can discuss between partners. So medicines management would be a really good example of that, and often it's medicines reconciliation between providers. I would give you that as the example where we can work together and work differently. So that allows us to have those easier conversations, I would say, and generate a mutual agenda for that.
So Zena, just to check then, since the appointment of the specialist, have they been involved in those issues that we've just discussed in the or had sight of in the previous report? Because I think that would be helpful in a future update on the role of this individual to or this post and this to understand that, just to kind of appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's important to context that in that the post holder came into post at the CCG in September, so very early days. You know, we're still in the first few months, and she has a joint role, half-time patient safety specialist, half-time in the perinatal quality and safety remit, and you'll recognise that maternity and obstetric, neonatal, perinatal quality and safety has been of paramount importance to us, whereas the patient safety strategy nationally was put on hold during the COVID time. So I think it's yet to realise its full potential, and we have maintained the system patient safety group, but it's running quarterly at the moment, and I've asked for that to increase in frequency, and we'll do that as soon as we practically can, Donna. So these will be matters that we will take forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks, Zena. Zena, I noticed that there isn't really a timescale that's articulated in the paper for the training programme. I realise obviously this may not be the ideal moment to be pushing out a training programme.
Yeah, we started a little bit on that, John. We focused the training on the quality team, folk that are actually intimately involved with the management of serious incidents and the like. There is a requirement for boards to be trained, and we've interpreted that guidance as it will be the ICB that we will seek to train, and therefore the recommendation is that subsequent updates will go to the ICB, because there's a direct implication for that group moving forward. And that was why I put my hand up, really. It was to approve the recommendation that the ICB receive the subsequent updates.
Okay then, so if we've teased out the main aspects of that, the recommendation to the governing body is to note and discuss the local progress being made with implementing the NHS patient safety strategy, and also to approve the recommendation that an update to the ICS board, ICB, is brought on a biannual basis. Okay. Thank you. Right. So if we can move now onto the next paper, which is that of the niche recommendations, the niche report that has been presented to board previously. Zena, I'm not sure if Kathy's with you today, but again, if we can use that same format, if I can open it to questions for the membership to begin with, and then we'll go from there. So, questions from the floor. Adam.
It's more of a comment than a question, really, which is just when I look at the niche report and I look at the standards on medical records requirements and the suggestion that we improve to a level where a patient's records are all held in one place. That's a bit damning, really. The things that are stated as requirements in that section of the niche report would seem fundamental basics of medical care and medical records. And I appreciate I come from primary care where it's been computerized for 30 years, but it just seems we seem to have come from a very, very poor place. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, thank you. And this report really, Zena, is a distillation of a summary of where we are in terms of the actions arising from the niche report, and also a list of recommendations of those actions arising from the niche report that we still have to cover as a system. And are part of that. Did you want to respond to Adam's comment really about the medical records handling aspect of it?
Yeah, so I mean, I take your point, Adam, and I think you're right in some respects that this is it's a commentary on our digital approach within the system. I'm really pleased SAF have stepped up and taken on board the findings in this recommendation, and I think we're not different in this system to very many other systems in how emergency department records are maintained on separate systems, because they're separate documentations, and that's how it is in very many organisations. But what other organisations manage to do is loop that together, so there is a single record with multiple inputs. And SAF hasn't been at that stage of digital maturity to allow that to happen. But they are progressing, and we hear, we've heard earlier today about the Badgernet improvements. So they do have a digital strategy. They are working through it. But as the action plan shows, I think it's item R1C, that there's ongoing audit, and there's senior medical oversight. Dr. McCree is oversighting that for us, and will provide updates. Adam.
Okay, thank you. And Meredith.
Thanks very much. And just to let you know, I've got a house of builders next door trying to smash our partition wall down. I do apologise for any extraneous noise. Zena and Deborah as well. It's good to see some progress being made on these very important areas, so that's great. There was just one that slightly surprised me. I noticed that the work around diabetes was described as urgent, and then when I checked the scheduled dates for progress, I see it's December 2022, and I was just wondering if anyone could give me a sense of what non-urgent might look like. Thank you.
Shall I answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I was just going to say that I think the issue with diabetes, Meredith, is it's an enormous piece of work. There are the diabetes care pathway. There are so many different aspects to it, and essentially all need review, both different sections of it and pulling it all together. So it is a huge piece of work that's going to take some time to do well. And as we've already heard, our capacity is limited at the moment because of the acute pressures. So I think, yes, it is urgent. Yes, I would like to see a sooner deadline. I think that the deadline there is probably realistic given all the pressures on us. That doesn't mean to say that it's not a really important piece of work, but we could say we'd have done it by April or June, but the reality is we wouldn't have done because there's too much to do.
Understood. Would it be reasonable though to suggest some milestones along the way, so that something might have happened by June and then October, rather than an absolute position? Because I can just see us getting closer and closer to December, and then that date will get pushed back further and further. I don't know. I'm not sure what's reasonable actually. So happy to take your advice. I
think that is a reasonable request, and what we could do is perhaps pass it back to the local care operational board who are overseeing it, and suggest that that's been a recommendation, and could they work to that? I think that would be very sensible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And Mike. Still on mute, Mike. There we go.
Right, sorry, thank you. I'm just struggling with the mute button. Thank you for the paper. It's what we needed to actually get some idea. The diabetic care, I agree with Meredith. I think there are still a lot of issues. I don't fully understand the actual text of it. Say, review care of the diabetic patient in the community and during transfer. What? I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. I'm being slightly naive. Secondly, just monitoring sugar is not the whole answer to sorting out people with diabetes, as I regularly have to struggle with them. The thing that I noticed, which I had to go back and find the initial letter, was about failed discharges and actually communication with discharges at all. We still have big issues about people being discharged without notification of anything going on. The issue about respect forms, which you haven't mentioned, is very hit and miss. Some people are very good at doing them. Other people send letters out saying we think you should do a respect form when they should be doing it as well. I find those issues still remain quite top of the list, and I can't remember, and if I didn't mention it last time, I do think that failed discharges and actual information on discharge remains poor and should be part of the NIST report. As it's stated in there, the NIST report, there was quite a lot of things that were rated quite poorly. I think one mention was 29%. So if you don't, and in the report itself, it said that a lot of the reasons why failed discharges occurred was because of lack of communication. There is the diabetic who's been sent home and the district nurses have not known that they're there. I can't, this is all anecdotal, so I can't not, so unfortunately I can't give you more details, but there are, within it, I think it, my answer is like my feeling is that it's a start, but if it's a finished article, then I definitely don't agree. The final thing about this, and I do apologise for this, is that it's the comment right at the start, proposed to share this report with the Integrated Care Board so it can be considered. So the answer is obviously, I don't know how that works with the fact that the CCG has been extended, but my personal feeling is that it should be shared with the ICB board now, so that it doesn't come as a full package when the ICB starts. And but I also think it should be brought back to the CCG for further updates. Sorry, which
thank you, Mike. And I'll give Simon a chance to come in on this point. But if we can just, and Mark I see has his hand up as well. Just on your first 3 points, Mike, you know, the respect forms, the importance of discharged and the fullness of the diabetes work. In a sense, I think they could possibly be included within that list of responses that we're looking at today. Zena, I don't know whether you'll be able to feed back within that, you know, the admission, the end of life care review that specifically addresses some of the issues that have been raised with regards to respect forms, perhaps within the discharge pathways that we incorporate Mike's feedback regarding communication at discharge. And Deborah, within the diabetes pathway, you know, I think it would be taken as read that this would just be more than just simply blood sugar levels, that this would be the entire treatment. So yeah, so specifically, Mike, if those 3 items can be covered within those responses we've got, in terms of the report to the Integrated Care Board, and I'm sure Mark and Simon may, I mean, with the previous paper, we recommended that you know, the ICB take this on, and in a sense, really, it's not for us to make the decisions of the ICB, but it is part of our remit to make sure that we do have an effective handover, and those pieces of work that are important for the ICB to be cited on do so in a proper way. Mark, do you want to come in first on that?
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, thank you. So I read the recommendation slightly different from the way Mike's described it. So the recommendation is proposed to share the report with the ICB. It doesn't mean that the CCG doesn't have any responsibility for it. So this is absolutely crystal clear. So the CCG is the accountable statutory body until midnight on the 30th of June, and we will work with you and guide you in terms of that responsibility. The ICB is then responsible from a minute past midnight. Don't ask me what happens bang on midnight. A minute past midnight. The position at the moment, Mike, just for clarity, is you know, in a way we have shared it with the ICB, because you've got people who sit around the ICB table here, and actually the ICB hasn't appointed its directors yet. So it doesn't have non-executives and it doesn't have a board. So you'll see more of this language on our papers. It's a marker so that we don't lose anything in transition. That's exactly what it's for. So what I do agree with Mike's sentiment is we will bring an update back, John. There's several things here that are down for March. So I would suggest that we bring an update back after March, hopefully to show that we've completed the stuff by March. And I also wanted to say thank you to Mike, because Mike, you might not realise it, it was you that stimulated this whole piece of work, because when I looked at what you'd said about the niche report and looked at the recommendations with Zena, we could see that the recommendations were clear, but in governance terms, we hadn't actually set out exactly what we were doing. And I'm very grateful to Zena and colleagues from the CSU. I hope you would agree. I think this is a really good action plan. It's really clear about what we're doing. We'll add those 2 bits and pieces to it, but it sets it out. And I think all of our responsibilities, sets out our responsibilities, and we're all keen that that duty is passed across promptly and well into the ICB without us dumping stuff on them that we've not covered. Yeah. So I think it does that well, John. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, that's covered that well. Thank you, Mark. Audrey.
Thank you for the paper as well. It's a very clear paper with good recommendations. And I just wondered, the recommendations and the agreed corresponding action plan, is the intent then to link it with the HSMR rates?
And that's the hospital standardisation mortality rate.
Yes.
So what this report didn't do was to link it in that way when it looked at information. It did a case-by-case review, and where HSMR falls down a little bit, Audrey, is that it's very much an acute-facing suite of metrics, and that we wouldn't have that particularly around any other providers who are partners to this kind of work. But for the likes of diabetes, it would feature as in that broader set of considerations around diabetes care being a patient pathway end to end. So we might be able to capture it through particular care groups and specialties, but it bears consideration if ever HSMR is featuring as an outlier in the acute care providers dashboard, and they're not featuring as outliers on their HSMR overall, and they manage any particular outliers through their mortality programme, I would say.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thanks. And finally, Julie.
Thanks, John. It was just to provide assurance that the elements within that related to respect and end of life have been picked up, and the end of life strategy is on track to be ready by the end of March. So it's just to give some assurance that is in hand.
Great. Many thanks indeed. Thank you. Thanks, Julie. OK, so the recommendations aren't specifically noted in the paper, but if I spell out that the governing body, it's proposed to share this report with the integrated care boards, that it could be considered and followed up by the system after dissolution of the CCG, and also that we approve the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin response as detailed in section 4, conclusions and next steps. Okay, thank you. Simon, I'm aware I invited you in and then I missed your hand at the pertinent moment, but perhaps that maybe that sort of whole idea and building on what Mark said, perhaps you're very welcome to bring that back into the later agenda item on the integrated care system update, if that's all right, Simon.
We'll do exactly that, Chair.
Thanks very much. Grand. Okay, so if we can move on to the next agenda item now, which is regarding the CQC inspection report regarding SAF, published 18th of November. There isn't an enclosure, just for those who are wondering whether there was an enclosure, there isn't an enclosure within the pack provided, but we have a presentation, and I believe that Mark and Zena are going to start with that. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I just introduced very briefly, and we provided a link to the full CQC report, which is very comprehensive. If I can just pass on apologies from Louise, the Chief Executive today from Shrewsbury and Telford. We've been trying to see all week whether we could organise it, orchestrate it, so that a senior colleague from Shrewsbury and Telford could join us today. Having discussed it again with Louise, I'm very comfortable as to why they aren't here. So obviously the reasons I called out before, and actually we've got a 2-day event going called a MADE event, which is an improvement event. And having discussed it with Louise, I think it's much more sensible that they focus their work on that for us today. This presentation, in a way, then will be in two parts. So Zena and I will take you through it now, but then John, SATH are working to an end of January deadline to complete their action plan, which then basically goes back round the CQC and others, and eventually through the SATH board and will be published. And Louise has very kindly offered to come back at that point when they've done their action plan to discuss that further and share it with the CCG board. So we'll happily do that. So sorry, Swami, we seem to have lost the slide again. That's it. Thank you. So the presentation briefly is in two parts. Zena's going to do the first part. I'm then going to literally take you quickly, and I'll try and call it out so that people are clear on what we're showing, the difference in the ratings basically between last time and this time. Just for clarity, Zena and I can't answer for SATH. That's not what we're here to do. We'll try and give you the clarity that we can, and there may be questions that we can't answer that we'll need to go back to SATH about. I'm happy to do that. So Zena, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Swami, I'll direct you to just certain slides because it's quite a lengthy slide deck. And just for the membership around the table, this is 59 slides, but we decided to keep the presentation in its entire format because this is SATH's briefing for SOAG, and I thought I'd just take a moment to describe the purpose of SOAG for those that are perhaps less familiar with it or new to our system. And SOAG as an acronym is SATH Safety Oversight and Assurance Group, and it's really concerned with making sure that progress is made against the CQC requirements for SATH, because when those reports landed in the last few years, there were significant and widespread concerns around the safety, leadership, etc. of services. And at that time, the trust was placed into quality special measures by NHS Improvement and an alliance arrangement by way of support through the University Hospitals Birmingham and also their maternity support partners, Sherwood Forest Hospital. That arrangement was made to support the leadership and quality governance of SATH. So just to frame SOAG then, it is a forum that meets monthly, and it's co-chaired by NHSEI Medical Director Nigel Sturrock, co-chaired with the ICS leadership, previously Mark Brandreth, now it's Simon Whitehouse who will be joining in that leadership role as of this month. And it also includes representation from throughout the system, not least SATH and the CCG, but also other system partners at executive level, so the executive medical directors, directors of nursing, chief execs or governance directors as appropriate for each organisation. Also includes CQC around the table because it's important that there is transparency in how we're reporting our progress, because that progress is reported directly and through formal reporting mechanisms from SATH to CQC, and that allows us triangulation of what we're being told in the system, allows us to have a really clear line of sight and that in the moment feedback from CQC as to whether or not they're satisfied with the progress being made or whether there are new and emerging concerns or indeed progress being made, which I'm pleased to note that there is. Also on that group is representation from our two Health Watch groups, and they take an active part in their roles there. So this takes us through the CQC report. We'll go to slide 3 if we may. Thank you. The core services that were inspected as listed: urgent and emergency care, medical care, end of life and maternity services. I think it's important to note this is a small sample of the entire services that could have been inspected, and CQC are taking a risk-based approach to the services that they do inspect. So we know that there were concerns and inadequate rating around maternity and urgent emergency care services. So you can see the rationale for those being selected. End of life care was featuring as requires improvement, and really we needed to, they needed to have another look at that for SAF, and indeed it bears some consideration for us as a system, but also medical care, which is a fairly standard to be included in any inspection. So it's a part inspection, and for that reason we don't always see ratings shift in its entirety for an organisation. So SAF's ratings overall have improved, and they've improved from 24 inadequate ratings to 11, which is really good progress on those 4 services that were inspected, and improved from 4 green good services to 6. But overall, that doesn't aggregate to sufficient change to change the trust rating, and we'll have to await further inspections that hopefully will demonstrate improvement in the services that aren't listed on this slide. So all of those 4 services looked at, as well as the well-led inspection. So slide 4, please. Okay, so I think, as I've just said, the trust has made progress, but rated inadequate overall, but there have been improvements there in the effective and well-led domains, so we recognise that improvement. Next slide. Thank you. And I think the narrative is really important. So the ratings and the scorecard is one thing, but what CQC said was that they found the right foundations were in place, and that's really encouraging, and that there's the right leadership approach. And through that, SOAG at one of their meetings towards the end of last year confirmed that there was confidence in the trust getting to good programme, and that it contained all of the right ingredients for success, and that the year 1 programme, which finished towards the end of last year, is now moved to the year 2 programme, and SOAG was satisfied that the right suite of measures and priorities were being looked at there. So some good leadership, some good care delivery, and a shout out for maternity services in particular, where there was an outstanding area noted on the report that staff recognised they were caring and compassionate, maternity staff, and under considerable scrutiny and difficult circumstances. So we must recognise that. Could we have slide 9, please? Okay. So some real positives there around compassionate care, progress in safeguarding and culture there, still having challenges around end-of-life care in particular. And this is a piece of work that it'll dovetail actually with the niche report that we've just spoken about, because the system end-of-life care group is developing its strategy, and it'll do that with inputs from SAF. So those 2 pieces will be knitted together. And on the end-of-life care bit, we are keyed into a national support offer from NHS E&I, and the CCG are part of that supportive approach to SAF to understand their now key priorities and the progress to be made. So that feels really positive. And as we've already noted, some ongoing issues around infection control practice, care planning and staffing levels. And I would say this isn't universal across every service. Bearing in mind this was a medical based inspection in the main relating to this this category. And it's not the finding across every medical ward in the 2 hospitals, but it was the general findings, and I think it reflects an inconsistency and is probably born out of a fragile substantive staffing plan, which we know we're challenged with in this system. So I was just going to take us to slide 56 and ask you to scoot back for Mark's slides from 10 onwards. Can you take us to 56? I just wanted to illustrate the changes made. So the columns on the left are the previous, and the columns on the right hand side in each category are the current, and we can see those positive movements as I've described to you. So I'll pause there and let Mark pick up, and I'll be available for any questions or comments at the end. Thank you. So if we go back to slide 10, and Mark can take it from there, Swarmeet. And you're on mute, Mark.
Thanks, Ina.
Thanks. Really, really helpful. So, I mean, I'm not going to be rude. I'm just going to say next, if that's all right, because we're trying to just show a kind of visual picture, if you like. So, John, I'm going to canter through these, and then we can share them with board members after the meeting if it's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And then I think if
Yes,
we have a good 15 minutes for discussions.
Yeah. So we'll be brief. So we'll see if we can do these quickly, and if not, I'll jump to the end. So next, please. Next. Okay, so this is the start of the pictures in effect. So Swarming, we're just going to go through them kind of one at a time, but we're going to go fairly quickly if we can, if that's possible. So what this shows visually, you can see the colours. It shows the consolidated ratings. The detail of this is all in the report, but it's a really helpful summary. So it's broken down by RSH, PRH, because CQC look at both, and then what that means in terms of the combined rating. So this is the RSH position at the last inspection. Next slide, please. This points out what Zena was talking about, which is really important to remember. It's really difficult to improve your rating from where staff were in one inspection, because as you can see, only 3 of these areas plus the well lead have been looked at, not all of the areas. So Zena made the point really very well. So let's just this calls it out. Next slide, please. So just looking at medical care, next slide. You can see the improvement. So Swarming, just go back a slide if you don't mind. So that was before, and next slide, please. This is now. So you can see how a lot of the red has gone to orange, so gone to a required improvement. So I'm now going to go a bit quicker in terms of taking you through them, because it's forgive me, because I know it doesn't work for everybody. It's a visual way of showing it. So next slide, please. This just calls out in a bit more detail some of the good practice. So I'm not going to go through that. Zena's talked about it already. Next slide, please. Again, just looking at end of life. This was before RSH. Next slide. This is now. So not the same level of improvement in end of life. I'm sure we'll touch on that, and Zena mentioned it a little bit before. Also links back to the niche report that we were talking about earlier on, of course, in terms of a theme. Next slide, please. Next slide. This was the urgent and emergency care before RSH. Next slide. And you can see the improvement in terms of 3 inadequates turning to RI. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So that's the summary overall of where it was before and where it is now. So you can see the improvement in terms of the turning to orange. So we're trying to get rid of the reds, basically. That's the plan. Next slide, please. Similarly for PRH, this was the overall position before. Next slide. These were the areas that were looked at. Again, just a reminder, CQC didn't look at everything. Next slide. So just looking at medical care again, that was the position before. So 4 reds and an amber for requires improvement. Next slide, please. So good, really good improvement there. So requires improvement across the board with a good for caring. Really nice to see a good for caring. Zena and I are both really pleased for them about that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So similarly on end of life, 3 inadequates and 2 RIs last time. Next slide, please. And a further inadequate this time around responsive. So that theme again about end of life on both sides. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Urgent and emergency care. So 4 inadequates and 1 RI. Next slide, please. And again, really good improvement there. So 3 RIs and now 2 goods, which again is great stuff. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then the maternity position last time in terms of 3 goods and 2 RIs. And the next slide, please. And the maternity position now, which basically is unchanged. Now, Louise particularly calls this out, given the focus on maternity in the last period. Zena may want to say a word on that, John, when we get to a summary at the end, but Louise particularly calls that out, and particularly calls the staff out for their hard work and resilience in maternity services over what's been a very difficult time for them and, of course, for local families. Next slide, please. Again. And indeed, there was an outstanding area of practice for maternity as well. So, John, I'm gonna stop there because there are more slides and we'll share them. But you can see, hopefully for some people, not for everybody, the visual kind of thing changes. It's some people like words, some people like pictures. Depends on kind of how you look at it, really. I just we can stop the screen sharing. So thank you, Stormy. Really helpful.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for that. And that's certainly, concentrated on the positives, which is certainly relevant. And can I bring in Lynn to begin with, please?
Hi, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Lynn Corley, Chief Officer at Healthwatch Shropshire, and for me, the issues around end of life are really stark when you think about the pace of improvement regarding that. And end of life is something that we've been looking at Healthwatch Shropshire for over 2 years, and we've done a couple of reports about this. And obviously those reports have included comments to SAF about people's experiences. We've been part of the system review into end of life care, and I just think that it's something that we need to revisit as Healthwatch Shropshire. So what would be really helpful to think about is what sort of focus we could put onto end of life care to try to understand a little bit more about the particular issues and what could be done to help improve those experiences for people, because it's one of those things that you only get one go at getting it right. And so it's something that we're really passionate about. So we'd welcome any conversation about what we could do to get people's views heard, to try and help improve the situation around end of life care.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. And I'll try and come back and sort of encapsulate some of these comments and questions as we go through. Can I bring in Audrey, please?
Great, thank you very much. And it's great to see the improvements, as you both noted, particularly around maternity. So well done, everybody there. I think what really struck me when I read this is the 72 must-dos, and we can't get away from those. And I was just wondering, is there a standardised, timely framework that has to be considered for these 72 must-dos? And what is the scrutiny? I know you touched on it briefly, Mark, but what is the scrutiny that the CCG has on these in particular?
Okay.
Do you want me to come in on that one? Yeah. So, well, first of all, on Lynn's question about how Healthwatch might be more connected to the improvement work, welcome that, Lynn, as always. I think the place to have those discussions is at our system quality group, where this information will be received and we can have more intimate discussions with the trust, particularly around end of life care. So we'll put a placeholder there. Thank you, and the same for Barry as well from the other side. Just in terms of timelines on Audrey, so as I mentioned, we don't have an action plan to share in the system at this point in time. CQC issue the report and then require SAF to provide an action plan to address the concerns. Now that action plan was received by CQC's specified date, which was just before Christmas, and they will be giving that due consideration. Part of the discussion we'll be having at SOAG this month is where is CQC in terms of responding to that action plan? So what level of confidence have they got that it's the right action plan, etc. Because they're the regulators that need to be satisfied on this. And then once we've got that confirmed, we'll have that released into the system for sharing, and that will then start to feature in the variety of sort of quality forums that we have. There isn't a time specified. Clearly, we want all service to be acting in accordance with its, with its registration and authorisation process. Where there are specific conditions and breaches around Section 3129A notices in particular, those clearly have a higher degree of priority, and we know that we still have some of those in place for SAF. What we don't have is the up-to-date list now, because SAF, CQC may choose to vary some of those conditions. They may reduce, they may increase some, they may just vary the specification around what they're asking by way of evidence on it. So they're quite an important partner for us to understand the next steps. And, as I say, part of the next steps are to receive the action plan and debate it within our system.
Thank you.
John, may I just add to the answer, if that's all right? I just deal with this kind of almost the second part of Audrey's question. Zena gave a very good answer, thankfully. I'm not surprisingly, Zena, so thank you very much. I know you've been all over this. From my perspective, Audrey, I think the governing body's got 4 lines of assurance, if you like. So number 1 is the direct interaction between the CCG and the trust, and that's done both informally, well, every day, and genuinely I mean that, every day, and more formally through Zena's mechanism. So that's the first line. The second line actually is SOAG, so the System Oversight Group. And I think, John, one of the things that we should be doing is, and I would suggest it goes into our quality committee. I think if it doesn't already, we should be noting the minutes and the action notes of SOAG through our own committee. It's another line of assurance, and people like Deborah and Zena and I regularly attend that on behalf of the governing body. And so for me, that would make sense. So there's the work of SOAG, the System Oversight Group, as the second level of assurance. The third level of assurance, of course, is our own committee. And the fourth level is the governing body itself. So I didn't want to give a trite answer because I think there are 4 levels of assurance in terms of this. So, John, I think what I'm suggesting as the next step for the governing body is that when the SAF action plan is approved, and I would probably suggest that it's gone through SOAG, and SOAG meets monthly, because there may be clarifications through the System Oversight Group, that then it comes here. And at that point, we would invite Louise or Hayley to join us to debate it. Zena and I think, John, that should be fairly soon, and we've got no reason to believe that won't be the case. It may even be the next public governing body meeting, and I do think we should take it in public. There's no reason why not. So, Audrey, hopefully that's helpful in terms of those kind of levels of assurance, if you like, really.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you both.
And Audrey, you'll know we do receive the SOAG information to our Quality and Performance Committee in the CCG. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And before bringing in Barry, Meredith, did you want to just enlarge upon the quality group?
Just that point. Thank you very much. Yeah. So yes, we do get a report at Quality and Performance Committee. Also, the minutes of SOAG do go through to the Quality and Safety Committee. The Quality and Safety Committee and the Quality and Performance Committee are going to be meeting jointly. So not only are we all over it, we're actually streamlining as we go too. So I think we do have good arrangements, oversight arrangements in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And Barry.
Yes, just as Lynn said, we attend the SOAG meetings regularly, and I'd like to say over the last year we've seen tremendous efforts put in by senior management and staff, and consistent progress taking place in many areas for which we are grateful. We've seen massive changes in the culture within the organisation within the last year or so, and it isn't likely that CQC have put down a caring organisation and compassionate. And I think these are the things that I would like to highlight, whilst we've got to look at some of the things that we've got to still work on, but we are consistently improving. And as Mark's shown us on the overhead, that we are getting towards good really well. And I think it'll not be long before we get to good. So keep the good work up, everyone.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions or points before I summarise where we are here? I'm aware, Lynn, that your offer there to link in system working in terms of how Health Watch can contribute there, very much appreciated. So if we note that, and also we as a governing body note and receive the CQC report, we note also the lines of assurance that have been described by Mark, and also that the next steps proposed that the governing body receive the action plan. Once that's been approved, it will return here to a public meeting in public for the CCG. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. So if we can now move on to the next agenda item, which is that of the finance and the financial position as of month 8. So again, if we can start, if I can open that by asking members whether they have any specific questions or comments for Claire before bringing Claire in. Okay, Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, afternoon, John. Afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my question really for Claire just is around whether she could elaborate a little bit on how we're getting on towards the 1.6% challenge for next year. Clearly, with COVID and all of the demands that we've had on the exec team through this year, it's been a real challenge to identify efficiencies, opportunities for the CCG. But increasingly into next year, we're going to have to make sure that every pound we get, we spend as wisely as we can. So just really looking at how the December meeting went and what are we going to do differently to try and make sure that we identify those efficiencies.
Claire, if you'd like to respond at this point, that would be grand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's fair to say when we reviewed the programme to date, we still have a long way to go. That 1.6% ask of the CCG budget equates to just over £7 million. And I think from memory, at the last review, we were somewhere between 3.5 and 4 million. So, as I say, a long way to go. Not unexpected, given the pressures that we're facing and the fact that a key number of our staff who are usually integral to driving the programme have been redeployed into other areas. What we've been doing in the meantime, though, so not to sit on our laurels, to keep some momentum in the work plan whilst we wait for our colleagues to be able to return to their business as usual activities, which includes this work, is that our PMO have been continuing to pursue any benchmarking information that we can get, and certainly linking in with wider system discussions, because actually I know this is a CCG meeting, but for me, any pound out in this system is what we need to be aiming for. So we're certainly tapping into that. We had a meeting with the directors back in December and a follow-up to that. Was it this week, last week? Gosh, the days are flying. Just again to make sure we maintain some momentum, but certainly about how we prioritise the areas of focus and the staff and resources that we've got to try and really identify those programmes of work that are going to make a difference. So unfortunately, not a great position at the moment. It's certainly not where we'd like to be, but we can understand why we're at where we're at, and we're making sure that we have that clear line of sight through the programme of work so that we can continue to build on that as we go. And Jeff will be bringing some more on that back, as you would expect, to Finance Committee at the end of the month, so we can continue that conversation there.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Any other questions, Claire? Claire, I just had one really minor point. In 33D, talks about the phlebotomy services being discussed, potential cost pressure there, and mentions a non-recurrent funding solution available in 2021. I'm presuming that's a typo, is it? For the
2021, yes, 21-22.
That's
so
so
we've got
21-22 rather than 22-23.
It is. We've got non-recurring cover for any work that's done up to the end of March, and then it's the conversation about the recurrent cover into 22-23 that will follow.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much, Claire. Thank you, and thank you for that report. Anything that you would else that you'd like to pick out and highlight for us, Claire?
Yeah, so two very brief points. First of all, I think the fact that we are there or thereabouts in terms of delivering the position that we said we would is testament to the hard work of the team. Landing the number, it looks simple on a piece of paper. It's really not. There's a lot of hard work going into stabilising that position and keeping it going. For 22-23, the paper makes reference to the fact that planning guidance was expected later in December. Partial guidance landed late on Christmas Eve. The team are working through that at the moment. We're working with what information we have, and certainly my intention is to bring an update to that through Finance Committee at the end of the month, and then onwards through our governance to this board as appropriate.
Okay, many thanks. So we're asked to note the month 8 financial position against the plan, and the governing body is asked to also note the work in progress to develop the 22-23 financial plan and the risk around identification of efficiency plans. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Okay, if we now move on to the next agenda item, which is the board assurance framework. Thank you, Alison, for providing this. Again, if I can start by opening this up to members for questions and comments. Jeff.
Yeah, it's just a comment really. As audit chair, we had a debate around the board assurance framework, which is clearly one of the key documents in terms of identifying and mitigating the risks to the CCG, and giving obviously the board the assurance that those things are being mitigated. Notwithstanding Mark's comments really at the start, just really about when we can start to see as a board the mitigation and the updates regularly being updated and being dynamic, because we're starting to I think, you know, lack assurance. I certainly gave limited assurance and can give limited assurance to the board as chair of the audit committee, and I think we're getting questions from external and internal audit around the use of the document and the updates.
Yeah, Alison, did you want to come back in at this point? Although, having said that, it might be better if we tease out any other questions first. Actually, sorry about that. Yeah, any other questions? One of the things I wanted to ask Alison, just in the round, adding to Jeff's comments, really, just the timing of updates of some of the items. You know, I looked at the risk 7 regarding restoration of services post-COVID. I just wondered whether, you know, given the time that was last looked at, and I recognise the pressures within the system at the moment, but it is going to be something that if we can keep a handle on that risk and what the mitigations are on a fairly sort of, you know, if that were a bi-monthly basis, you know, just to keep a refreshment so that we know what risk we're you know, I think that is one of our major risks going forward, and we keep that to the fore. That was one of the main comments, really. I know that we've got a few areas that were last reviewed sort of September. The financial stability, risk 4, still referenced our director of transformation and what have you. I just think possibly just keeping a slightly tighter control on our BAF might be helpful, but within the obviously the framework of all other work that's being done. Mark, did you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, so you know what I'm going to say, I guess, which is just to stand in front of Alison slightly, in that the people that she would normally go to for the updates are just not doing what they normally do at the moment, which is tricky. So I think I'd be interested in Jeff's view. I've got 2 thoughts. One is, I think we need to perhaps take a slightly different approach to the BAF in the next few weeks, and possibly, in effect, we can plot out now to the end, to the dissolution, the end of the CCG, and just work out, John, with Jeff really clearly, because I think Jeff could help us really clearly when we're going to update on what, because we don't want to leave a mess. There's no question of that. We want to try and hand over well, and it may be worth us just thinking that through a bit more, because there is an end now, and I don't think it will be extended again. I think that might be worth doing. John, your point's well made. Let's take it back through, if it's all right, back through the directors team, and we'll see what we can do, particularly on some of the areas that you've called out. Jeff, my other thought, I'd be interested in Claire's view. We aren't any different from any other CCG. I do wonder whether, and I'd be happy to support with this, that we orchestrate a quick half-an-hour chat with the auditors. 1, to just explain our position, but 2, more significantly, to seek advice from them about what other places are doing to see if we're missing a trick. We're unusual, John, and you know this. We're actually unusual in terms of a CCG having any kind of governing body meetings at the moment. And you and I decided that was a better thing for us in terms of risk. But this is kind of a consequence of it. We just don't have the resource to do the backing work to some extent. So maybe that's if that's perhaps helpful. I'd be interested in Claire and Jeff's view. I'd be absolutely happy to join the auditors in a conversation.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, so just bringing in, if I bring in Alison, we'll bring everyone in turn, but Alison.
Yeah, so I just want to remind everybody about the linear nature of the reporting of the BAF. So the BAF is updated on a bi-monthly basis, and it's actually reported to Audit Committee in the first instance, because Audit Committee are delegated with the assurance mechanism on behalf of the board. So what you're seeing today is the report that was presented to the November Audit Committee. So take your point, John, about the example you gave around the Executive Director of Transformation, but I just wanted to point out for everybody, at the time of reporting, the Executive Director of Transformation was still in their post, so it wouldn't have been appropriate for them not to appear, because they were technically the risk owner at that point. So I think I just want to remind everybody that you're seeing an iteration of something that's already been through one assurance process, i.e. your audit committee, and it's actually the audit committee that are looking at that in more detail. And as Jeff's pointed out, there was quite a lively debate about some of the detail of the BAF at the November meeting, which have obviously been captured, and as us as an executive team are attempting at the moment actually a review of that in order to report again in January.
Yeah, thank you, Alison.
So that's helpful. Yes,
no, it is really helpful, and you know, these aren't criticisms as such. They're more just trying to help that process of having a really,
and that's the vein it's taken in, John.
Productive and useful BAF that doesn't just gather dust but actually has a function. Grand, if I can move on to Lynn, please.
Firstly, my apologies, I might not fully understand the BAF, but I just wanted to say, and it may or may not be relevant, that Healthwatch Shropshire, before the boards joined together, used to present a regular report on our activities to the governing body, and that included any key pieces of work, reports and recommendations we'd made across the system. And I just wondered, I mean, I know that the CCG will cease soon this year and move towards the ICS, but I just wondered if the work of Healthwatch couldn't contribute to some of the assurance of the board as it has done previously. So I just wanted to put that out there, really.
Alison, did you want to come back in on that point from Lynn, that offer?
I think you're on mute, Alison. So I can't hear anything you say.
Alison, you're still on mute.
And still on mute.
Oh no, you're stuck. You're stuck. Maybe I should go. Mark, Healthwatch used to provide a report to governing body, which we would receive, and yes, it has slipped off. I mean, Lynn's offer really there to sort of key in with parts of assurance and describe the work that they're doing.
Yeah, to be honest, Lynn, I'm reluctant to start new stuff with 5 months left. You do, of course, go to the, you attend the ICB board. It may be better to think that through with that. Alison may advise about whether, I'm not sure, because it's the board assurance framework, I'm not sure in governance terms we can take assurance from your reports, but Alison may have a view on that. But please don't misunderstand me. The sentiment of your offer is very warmly received, so thank you.
I mean, I mentioned it because in part I know that when we were reflecting on maternity, for example, across the system, some of the work that we'd done around maternity was included as part of the assurance conversation. So that's why I'm not making that suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's a very good, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. And in terms of receiving reports from elsewhere, I noticed in our risk 1, the Assuring Involvement Committee, we would normally have a report come to board, which I understand has been, we've tried to get one, but we haven't. So Alison has kindly assured me that we're chasing it and we should receive at our next board meeting. We were hoping to have had one here. Okay, and Jeff.
Yeah, it was just coming back to Mark. I mean, I'd be absolutely delighted to work with Mark and take this forward. I mean, I do think that we've got, on a positive note, I do think that we've got the key strategic risks identified, and I do think that there's a lot of very good and strong mitigation in there. It's more around the assurance that they're being updated and we're looking at it, and I'm sure the discussions are going on all of the time around those key challenges. It is just really for the assurance and the governance part of flowing that back to the board to have a document to evidence that. That's all. I don't think this is a major rewrite. I don't think on any level that the audit committee or indeed the auditors think that we're not focused on the key strategic challenges to the CCG. It is just the governance process really that we've just got to dot some I's and cross some T's.
That's really helpful, Jeff. And I suppose my point was there's probably only 2 or 3 updates needed now with this before the dissolution. So when you break it down like that, it's not as onerous. And it might be, and I used to do this in another place, Alison, given the in extremis, it might be that you and I just need to sit and dump our collective brains and see what we can update without necessarily every director contributing and seeing if we can narrow the gap. So why don't we do that too and see if that can help? But it is an important document because it is definitely keeps us safe. So I'm totally agreeing with Jeff about just keeping on top of it, really. So let's see if we can do that, John, and if we can set out clearly when the risks will be updated towards the dissolution, because we'll need to do that just before we dissolve as well to try and help. So I think they're really sensible thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Claire.
Yeah, thank you. Just to support those comments, really, I don't think it necessarily needs an additional conversation with the external auditors. I think we've got some really good opportunities through our existing channels to have those conversations, either through audit committee or through the conversations we'll most definitely be having as we prepare for year end. We've also got the advantage of is it an advantage? I'm not sure, but we will be having a new audit partner for this audit because Mark Stocks has reached the end of his tenure. So audit leads have a shelf life in terms of how long they can audit an organisation for, so that they don't become too conflicted really and too close to what's going on. So certainly we'll be having some longer conversations, I think, this year, so that we can introduce the new partner into what we do and we can really test that through those as well. And I'm speaking to them both near the end of the month, so we'll check that out with them there.
No, thanks for that. Thank you. Mindful of time slightly because I know we've got a couple of items yet to progress, but if I can move through Barry and then Meredith, please. But Barry.
Mine was very quickly adding on to what Lynn said about the reports to CCG or ICB. Healthwatch has a statutory obligation by the government to do independent reports, and I think the emphasis is on independence, not quality assurance in-house. So yes, I hope we can work together and we can do independent reports or as requested or when we think they should be. So our offer's there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great, Barry. Meredith.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the fact that we're getting ready to hand our baton to the next runner as we sprint for the line. I'd just be interested to hear from Simon. Hello, Simon, by the way, just in terms of how the ICB is beginning to develop its assurance framework so that we can make sure that what we hand over is as chimes as well as possible with the burgeoning ICB assurance framework.
Thank you, Meredith. And Simon, can I invite you to bring that, response to that in that under your agenda item, the update for the ICS. Is that all right, Simon?
Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, thank you all. So I'm going to summarise at this point that the governing body is recommended to review the BAF, which has been done, and consider any additional assurances that are necessary for the risk the strategic objectives are being properly managed, to accept, and I think we've heard limited assurance from the CCG Audit Committee that the principal risks of the CCG not achieving its strategic and operational priorities have been accurately identified and actions taken to manage them, and note that further work is taking place to review the risks associated with commissioning and transformation with a view to these being presented to the Audit Committee at its meeting in January of this year. Okay, thank you. So if we can just now move through to the next agenda item, that's the Constitution and Governance Handbook, and that's accompanied by the letter that we've mentioned previously of the 24th of December from NHS regarding the reporting and burden of reporting and releasing capacity to manage the pandemic. So, Alison, instead of going through necessarily to questions first, I think, as I read it, there's a fairly straightforward ask within your paper. Alison, did you just want to put a two-line summary for us?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just simply that we've got a very small amendment to the Governance Handbook in terms of the chairing of the Strategic Commissioning Committee. And then we've also included the letter that came out on Christmas Eve around CCGs realigning their focus in terms of the pandemic response and the incident 4 that we're currently experiencing at a local level here as well. I just wanted to make that clear to everybody. Mark and I have already had a discussion about how we can streamline further on top of what we'd already done in December and January, going forward to the end of the CCG in June. And we'll be sending that out for your information, your comments, and hopefully your support. We think it's a pragmatic proposal, but we'd like to share that with you.
Thank you, Alison. And unless there are any questions from the floor, I think this meeting has already demonstrated that we can streamline processes to some degree and still have effective governance assurance. But I was going to comment just briefly on the letter that we received. There's some fairly important points within that, and one of the ones I was going to tease out, Alison, was just that it does specify specifically within things such as the long-term plan, particularly that maternity and neonatal services continue to implement the supporting initiatives around that, and so I guess that there is a importance for us as a system very much within the letter of the 24th of December, but that's clearly specified. So any other comments or questions for Alison at this point? Otherwise, we're asked to approve the amended governance handbook with the highlighted amendments as noted and outlined in the report and Appendix A attached, and also to note the letter from the Chief Operating Officer of NHS England. Okay, thank you. Now, Simon, this is the point really to the meeting where I welcome Simon Whitehouse, who's the interim CEO of the ICS of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. Simon, a very warm welcome to you. You've heard many references to the ICS, the ICB this afternoon already, and the desire of this board that this sort of handover process, if handover is the correct word, I'm not sure that it is, but that it's effective, that it's collaborative, and it's done in a responsible way. You've had a few questions posed already, such as the development of assurance frameworks. But Simon, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well, and then we'll have a time to ask you any questions that the membership may have.
Thanks very much, Chair. So, look, firstly, let me say thank you for the warm welcome from everybody that I've come across since I landed officially on the 4th of January, although I was doing some unofficial meetings prior to that. I've just been absolutely impressed with both the hard work that's taking place, but also people taking the opportunity and the time to make sure that I settle as quickly as possible. So credit and thank you to everybody in that regard. For those that have not had the opportunity to meet with yet, or been in conversation with, or weren't involved in my recruitment process prior to Christmas, as John said, I'm Simon Whitehouse, and I previously was lead in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. but I originate as a physiotherapist, and I trained at the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital several years ago now, but that was where I did my first clinical training. Look, I'm really delighted to have joined the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin system, and really keen to work with you and colleagues. The other bits in terms of saying the thank you is just to recognise that the really hard work that Mark and the other CCG directors I've seen sort of demonstrable over the past few days in terms of past week and a bit. Focus on the vaccination, the focus on prioritising the work and getting to the right areas, the focus on the urgent care pressures. It's just been really impressive, Chair. So really important actually that I recognise that to board members in terms of my first impressions of landing in the system. In terms of this, I recognise time for this slot and recognise that you're keen to finish on time, Chair. So my starting gambit actually was going to be, can we use this more as the introduction piece? And then subject to your agreement, I'd be really keen to come back with a longer agenda slot and spend longer doing the conversation of transition and what does that look like, and what are my thoughts on that, and how does that work from a CCG perspective. I guess, you know, Mark's already touched on the extension of the CCG, and when we look at this, I think for any of us that were involved in 2012 of the establishment of CCGs, the bit that we learnt then was doing the send and receive bit well actually just made life so much easier in terms of day one. But in doing that send and receive bit, actually, I think in 2012 there was much more of the PCT's closing and gone, and it looks something different, and it looks like this. I think if we've learned anything from that, we've learned that this transition, we need to keep the really good work that's happening. There's enough going on, and there's enough challenges in all of the systems, but especially in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, in terms of the need to deliver really high quality health and care to the residents that we serve, that actually we just need to do this transition really well. But in saying that, the send and receive bit for me, I guess there's links to some of to the question that Meredith raised, is for us to do the receive bit well, then we've got to have people and resources enabled to receive. So one of the things that we're starting quickly is the recruitment. Neil McKay, as the chair, has already gone out to recruit to the non-executive positions. That's in process. We are working through with CCG colleagues to go out to recruit to the ICB directors, to the 5 posts that have been agreed by system partners within a week time, hopefully, with the plan of getting those people in place. So actually that extension of the CCG of those 3 months enables us to get in a much better position to manage that transition well. And I think that's a really important point. I think so. You know, in terms of Meredith, that board assurance framework, I think we've got to use these 6 months really well to get to the right place on this. But equally, I don't believe that I'm suggesting that any of this needs to be a blank sheet of paper. If we've got really good bits of work, really good documents that the CCG and system partners have got in place, then we should be looking at saying, actually, let's spend our time focusing on how do we improve the health and care for the residents, and how do we adopt, and how do we develop, and how do we take on a lot of the work that CCG colleagues have done. So I don't see this as a finish on one day, rip everything up and start again. I very much see this as an evolution and a transition, and I think it's really important that we set the tone in terms of that. In saying that, Chair and colleagues, look, I also recognise that this feels and will feel uncertain, and will feel the scale of change for colleagues, the level of uncertainty will make that potentially really difficult at a time when we need everybody focusing on the work that we need to deliver. So part of, I think, myself, Mark, Neil's responsibility is to really have a focus on doing that transition well, but doing it as quickly as possible, but also doing it with colleagues so that people are really clear what's going on and what's happening and where we're trying to get to. So managing the people well through this piece is a really clear priority for us right from the outset, and that's been part of the conversation that I've had with Neil and had with Mark and with yourself, John, even when I was thinking about applying for the role and considering that to start with. The final bit for me is there's been some really good work done. You've heard it in terms of, I apologise for my dog in the background. You've heard it in terms of the vaccination programme. You've heard it in terms of the progress with SAF on the CQC. The real challenge now is how do we carry on delivering that work and carry on making that progress, whilst at the same time doing the work in terms of the financial sustainability. How do we get the clinical and professional leadership into the right place? And how do we make sure we've got a real focus on driving that and delivery of integrated care that it meets the needs of the residents of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. So for me, our focus absolutely needs to be much more on that integrated care delivery, working with our clinical and professional leads, providing the right framework to enable that to happen, enabling place and the 2 place boards to really get into that delivery mode, making sure that we keep that really strong GP and primary care community focused approach, that we get into the wider determinants of health across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and we can really start to step up into that space and take on the work that the CCG have been at the forefront and leading over the past few years. That would be my overview, John, to start with, just aware of time. But like I say, would be really keen to come back with a longer agenda item and get more into the detail of that transition and what the timeline would look like and when some of those key decisions will be.
Thank you very much, Simon. And yes, that's an offer I'm sure that we would wish to take you up on. So thank you. So yeah, opening to any questions, comments from the floor. I know, Simon, that earlier in the meeting, obviously there was that offer that the niche recommendations that piece of work is provided, you know, to the ICS to have that awareness at this stage that work's being done, and then help that sort of give and receive part of the process that you described. But yeah, has anyone any specific questions for Simon? Good. Okay. Well, not good that there are no questions, but good that it seems that you have covered the ground, Simon, by the sounds of things. And yeah, and I think, yeah, the work is very encouraging. I think, you know, I've seen myself from sitting on the ICS shadow board that, you know, there is a real desire to have collaborative working and for this to be a success for our healthcare and social care system across the board. So you're warmly welcomed, and yes, I'm sure we would very much wish to see you back before we're dissolved for an update of really where we are, and that will become more imperative as we get ever closer to the time, really, that process goes smoothly. So thank you for your work with that. Okay, thank you. So the next papers are for information only. I've not been notified of any other business. The date and time of the next meeting is that March the 9th, Wednesday, 2022, time to be confirmed. So at this point, the resolve is that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting, having regard to the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity on which would be prejudicial to the public interest, section 1, paragraph 2, the Public Bodies Admission to Meetings Act 1960. Thank you to all of you that have contributed. I mentioned, I hope David Sunday, who joined us as a GP registrar. David, it's good to see GPs coming into the system and who are interested in the governance assurance and aspects that underline and lie alongside the delivery of healthcare. So I hope that's been helpful for you, and thank you for all those that.
It has been. Thank you very much.
Great, good, and thank you to all those who provided the papers and the work behind the scenes for this meeting. And for those that will be joining us for part 2, I suggest that we now have a 5-minute comfort break, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes' time. Thank you very much.
go